The Inca were an indigenous group native to South America who first appeared in the early 13th century. They began as a small tribe in modern-day Peru and formed a small city-state which became known as the Kingdom of Cusco. The ninth ruler of the Kingdom of Cusco, known as Pachacuti, rapidly expanded the territory of the kingdom and formed the Inca Empire in 1438 CE. Within a single lifetime, Pachacuti and his son stretched the empire over large portions of South America, including parts of Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, Argentina, and Chile. At one point, there were more than 10 million people living under the Inca government and at least 20 different languages spoken. In order to manage and maintain such a large empire, Pachacuti needed a sophisticated government to effectively and accurately collect taxes, supervise building projects, enforce law, and direct the military. However, without a written language, it was difficult to manage such a large empire alone. Thus, Pachacuti split the empire into four parts. These parts are called Suyu. The four Suyus were the Chinche Suyu, Antisuyu, Colasuyu, and Contonsuyu. As a result, the Incas referred to their empire as Tahuantinsuyu, which meant land of the four regions. Each Suyu was placed under a governor who reported directly to the central government located at Cusco. The emperor lived in the capital city Cusco with his family, top leaders, and closest advisors. This type of government is referred to as the federalist system. However, in this case, the emperor was the supreme ruler over all the states. As mentioned before, Inca hadn't developed a written language. As a result, knowledge was preserved orally and through a unique system of knots called quipu. Quipu was used to collect data, measure population, and keep records. Unfortunately, the ability to read quipu faded away once the Spanish established control over the Inca, so most of the information regarding Inca is based on discovered artifacts and written records from the conquistadors. One thing to keep in mind is that the Inca Empire stretched vertically throughout the Pacific coast of South America, right on top of the Andes Mountains, meaning the Inca lived in high altitudes with the entire empire covered in mountains. In order to adjust to this environment, they developed terrace farming to better irrigate their fields. The main crops cultivated were corn, tomatoes, squash, and sweet potatoes. They also raised guinea pigs, ducks, and dogs. Although Inca was an advanced civilization and had the concept of a wheel, they never utilized it since it was practically useless in their environment, which was covered in mountains. As a result, one of the most important animals for Inca was the llama. It provided the peasants with wool and carried heavy loads as well. Furthermore, the Inca were great construction workers and architects. They built a large and intricate network of roads that stretched the empire. Additionally, they built suspension bridges made up of rope in order to travel from one mountain range to another. It is believed that Pachacuti initiated the construction of four huge royal estates, the most famous one being Machu Picchu. The Inca Empire was multi-ethnic. It incorporated new land through diplomacies and conquest. They first sent lavish and expensive gifts to the rulers of the area they wanted to conquer, as an invitation to join the empire without any conflict. However, if the gift was rejected, the emperor, or also referred to as Sapa Inca, sent his large multi-ethnic military to war. Inca had a strong centralized bureaucracy, which meant that they had a set of regulations and laws that made it possible to achieve complicated actions, such as collecting taxes. There were two main taxes that the people were required to pay. The first tax involved the transfer of crops that the peasants and common folks had cultivated. The crops were divided equally between the government, priests, and lastly for the people themselves. The second type of tax was called the mita. Mita was a labor tax that men between the ages of 16 and 60 had to pay by working for the government for a portion of the year. They worked for the government as soldiers, builders, or farmers. The Mita system made it possible for the Inca Empire to build complex infrastructure in a short period of time. Regarding the cultural and religious practices of the Inca, they worshipped gods of nature like the sun, the earth, and the thunder. Amongst their several gods, the most highly regarded and powerful was the sun god and his wife, the moon goddess. They believed that gold was the sweat of the sun and silver was tears of the moon. Consequently, silver and gold were used to decorate temples. The most important temple in Cusco was the temple of the sun god Inti. The temple walls and floors were all covered with sheets of gold. Additionally, they sacrificed humans and animals for ritualistic purposes because they believed one would inherit the powers of the person by consuming their flesh. Inca worshipped their ancestors and kept mummies of some of them, although their mummification process and tradition is slightly different from Egyptian ones and less popular. It still existed. The deceased were naturally mummified by the cold, arid, and windy environments of the mountains. The Incan Empire, although still young and rising, came to an end shortly after it began. In the 16th century, there was a civil war between the two sons of the emperor, Atahualpa and Huascar, both claiming the throne after the death of their father. Although Atahualpa won the battle, the Inca Empire was greatly weakened from the internal battles. On top of that, in 1532, a Spanish explorer called Francisco Pizarro landed on the coast of South America and established the first Spanish settlement in Peru, called San Miguel de Piera. The Spanish explorers brought diseases to the New World. One such disease was the smallpox, which decimated the Inca population, further weakening it after the Civil War. Francisco Pizarro and his men were in awe of the riches that covered the empire. As a result, they were eager to conquer the Inca as fast as possible. Even though Pizarro only had a few hundred men at his disposal, he managed to lure Atahualpa to a feast, claiming to be in his honor. Atahualpa felt as if there was nothing to worry about since he had tens of thousands of men, in contrast to Pizarro, who had only few. However, during the feast, Pizarro's men opened fire on the unarmed Incas, successfully holding the emperor hostage. The emperor was held hostage until a room full of gold and silver was exchanged for his life. Even though the gold and silver was delivered by the Inca, the emperor was still executed by Pizarro and his men. Pizarro then marched to Cusco and took over the city in 1533 CE and established the city of Lima as the new capital of Peru. There, he would rule as governor for the next 10 years until his assassination in 1541.